For centuries, human beings have told stories concerning new revelations about the nature of reality. One could posit that this began in the remote reaches of our primitive past, where through ceremonies that placed emphasis upon their nervous physiology, men could be hallucinated into strange realms in the sky or in the deep bowels of the earth, where they would come into contact with spirit guides who offered admonitory instruction on how to live properly. Fast forward into the modern age and we are still telling such stories, albeit with a new lick of paint that befits the styles of our period, yet beneath these forms the old archetypes remain, and they have persisted precisely because they are addressing the same fundamental issues of human existence we still find interesting. Recently I had the pleasure of watching The Matrix again on the big screen, and what really impressed upon me was that its symbolism has far more relevance for us today than when it was released in the late 90s. The Matrix follows the journey of a one Thomas Anderson, who lives a dual existence between his normal life and a private life as a hacker. He is pestered by doubts concerning the validity of the world and the life he leads, until one day, in keeping with mythological tradition, he is abducted from his mundane life and sent on an adventure where he learns that his doubts had meaning. The world is indeed not as it seems, and this later unfolds into the terrifying revelation that the reality that most human beings interpret as normal is in fact an artificial simulation that masks another, darker reality of perpetual subjugation and mental slavery. Over the course of his metamorphosis, Anderson takes on a new identity, Neo, who stands as the awakened saviour who will redeem the world from its mechanical tyranny and return people back into the light of their original, organic consciousness. This has strong airs of Gnosticism to it, which similarly held to an intense skepticism about the integrity of material reality. In Gnostic cosmology, the material universe is seen as a prison which holds divine souls in a cycle of bondage, and like the living batteries we see in the Matrix, people will remain chained to this cycle forever, unless, through spiritual purification, they can be liberated and returned back to the pleromic centre of creation, which is our true home and origin. What I find fascinating about these types of stories is how readily they configure into the state of the world today. Like Keanu Reeves' character in the film, many of us have felt the lingering suspicion that the popular narratives on life, nature and history are neither sophisticated descriptions of wider reality, nor sufficient in satisfying the inherent dynamism of what we are as living, conscious beings. It seems that there is a veil to be broken, yet to go about doing that necessitates that we understand the nature of how the veil works. This will be the first in a series of ongoing videos where I will explore the existential relationship between mind and society. And in order to do that, in not just a substantial but also an engaging way, I'll call upon examples in both popular culture and through the ideas of various innovative thinkers to reveal just how our world is being moulded in conformity with the mandates of a certain style of intelligence, an intelligence that not only alienates us from our true nature, but which in turn fosters a deracinated view of life which, like the simulation of the Matrix, is presented to the masses as the utmost semblance of manifest reality. Ever since the ascension of the industrial age, there has been an ongoing process of analysis and critique surrounding our relationship to technology and how it informs our relationship with the world. Many philosophers, artists, revolutionaries, scientists, and anyone with an inquisitive enough disposition to meditate upon our state of affairs has at some time, either privately or publicly, questioned this relationship. Technology was supposed to make our lives easier, simpler, and more exciting. Yet now, with the ascension of smart devices, automation, and AI, we seem to be more and more exposed to the realities of a looming existential crisis. And all of this, of course, implores that I should ask a rhetorical question. Could our intimacy to machines and the world that we are creating with them be at all linked to this? The Anglosphere has inarguably been the epicenter of this expansionist program and the new outlook on life I will be highlighting in this video. The Great Industrial Period, which flourished in Europe and extended outwards to the rest of the world, set a new precedent for conceiving just how human beings could live and what human value might be measured by. Its evolution into the techno-corporate world of the early 21st century has not done anything to inhibit these developments. In truth, it has only accelerated them. Yet the same world that gave precedence to the machine is also home of some of its most outspoken and erudite critics that have served to remind us of the wider picture beyond the confines that the advertisers of modernizing society encourage us to believe. And the thinker I want to turn to in this treatment is the English psychiatrist Iain McGilchrist. Iain wrote a book titled The Master and His Emissary that has been instrumental in uncovering the bases for the development of our modern perspective, which he suggests resides primarily at the level of our two hemispheres. A simple distillation of McGilchrist's case is that despite being involved together in every conceivable action and behaviour that we do, the two hemispheres possess idiosyncratic characteristics that distinguish them from each other, and what arises from this are two fundamentally different ways of reading into life. The right hemisphere sees more than the left, but what it makes up for in scope it loses in precision. The right hemisphere is also more open to new information, unpredictability, randomness, and anomalies than the left is, and is responsible for things like pattern reading, interpreting social behaviour, facial recognition, and depth. The left hemisphere, to steal from McGilchrist's playful phrase, is the brain's high-functioning bureaucrat. It affords us the necessary ability to be able to hone in on precise details and make discriminations between things, which in turn establishes our ability to categorise and compartmentalise reality into criteria that helps us to navigate and manipulate it to our designs. The Master and His Emissary is extensive in its examples of how these hemispheric perspectives inform and detract from our way of interpreting life. But the real matter of the book stems from the fact that once we understand what the two hemispheres are made of, we are able to notice their effect all around us, in various manners of speaking, our predispositions for certain takes on life as opposed to others, preferences for different styles of art and personalities even. We simply cannot escape the fact that part of our interpretation arises from the activity of our brain. And since our brain possesses two broad perspectives, so to speak, the characteristics of these perspectives inevitably ends up bleeding into our persuasions on life. And if these get encoded into philosophical systems or ideologies that try to affect our relationship with the world, these can, at least on one level, be regarded as differing calibrations of the bihemispheric worldviews. The second part of the book extends this understanding across human history and observes that at certain periods, a synthesis of these two worldviews has produced remarkable innovations in our understanding of nature and of ourselves, and this has cascaded into the foundations of our culture, fertilizing the roots of all art, science, philosophy, and how we set ourselves in accordance with reality. However, frequently after these special developments occur and settle into the societal architecture, there tends to be fluctuations that take us away from the dynamic position, and which ultimately calcifies into a preference for a certain kind of linear, less dynamic system to take shape. These systems could be highly sophisticated in many ways, but because they hold a heavy preference for a certain type of view, they remain caught inside the trappings of that view, much to the detriment of their societies. In his book, Ian McGilchrist argues that ever since the Industrial Revolution and its subsequent phases of technological and societal development, these artificial changes have encouraged a peculiar perspective to emerge, one that can be characterized by a more mechanistic, hyper-rationalistic, reductive, and bureaucratic persuasion, and one which has laid the grounds for a new cultural framework for interpreting the complex world. And despite the fact that we can easily point to many areas of this development that have significantly elevated our lives, at the most important level of all, at the level of our own minds, we are surrendering to a heavily biased take on life which is concordant with the way that our left hemisphere sees things, and this naturally comes at a detriment of what the right has to offer. Just like the fictional matrix, a mesh has been formed over our experience of reality, one that looks, smells, and tastes like the real world, yet which we are all relating to through an existential filter that structures the way that we read into it. Reading Ian McGilchrist's book is like exploring the matrix, the existential layer that fabricates our experience of the world. Through a thorough yet engaging and accessible language, he shows us how the way that we attend to the world alters the information that we receive from it. Information literally warps and bends according to the style of predisposition we apply to phenomena, which means that, well, if we are truly seeing things more and more from the left hemisphere's vantage, are we even perceiving reality at all? How many times in this culture have we encountered the persuasion that we are nothing more than biological machines, and that nature is merely a complicated assembly of mechanistic parts? We never used to talk about life in this way. For the longest period in our history, we have always spoken about nature as being inherently alive, and that our bodies operate like organisms, not mechanical particulates. The complex world doesn't actually operate as an assembly of static or disembodied particulates, but the left hemisphere breaks it down as if it does. And the benefit of this perspective is that it affords a quick and dirty fix on the environment which allows us to manipulate it better. Our success in doing so through the use and manufacture of mechanical devices then reinforces the view that this take on life must be correct. And the more machines we make via this trick, the more we find ourselves present in a world of machines. And this environmental pattern has profound consequences for how we relate to ourselves. The psychologist and theorist Julian Jaynes says that the metaphors that the mind uses to describe itself are the world that it perceives. So if we are applying a lopsided outlook to compartmentalize and manipulate the environment, and from that we are producing a plethora of new mechanical devices that help us to manipulate and shape the world to our ends, is it any wonder why we reach for mechanistic metaphors to describe what we are and the world we exist in? As the modernization of the Western world has accelerated, the proliferation of this worldview has only enlarged with it. It is now customary, reasonable even, to talk about ourselves as if we are machines. In fact, it is the mark of a sophisticated scientific intelligence to state so. But if a man with schizophrenia tells us that he is existentially dead and has become a robot, we strip him of his civil liberties, imprison him in an institution and subject him to forced medication and interrogation until psychiatrists who have deracinated, dehumanized and deprivileged their own existential foundations through the very same lenses through which they interpret the human subject, deem his condition acceptable enough to be released back into the societal ecosystem, whose predominant outlook is, at least in some part, an accomplice in creating such existential dilemmas. We have all become the children of the demiurge trapped inside our own creation. We are encased in Maya, believing ourselves to be wise and sensible creatures. And the more that we engage with this particular style of attention, the more we shape the world in conformity with its nature, until we get to the place where we are now, where the style of attention in the world that we are making is becoming more and more the same thing. And it appears that everywhere we look now, we see the effects of its influence. In the way that we are systematically educated, in the way that we process the food that enters into our bodies, in the metaphors that we call upon to describe that body and describe our experience of reality, in the way that we envisage society as a rationalistically regulated system of laws, procedures and protocols, and even down to the way that culture is produced, in conformity with market fluctuations and target demographics, never visionary, rather in imitation of the visionary. Everything in the bizarre marketplace of culture by contrivance becomes a semblance of something truly real and substantive, a procession of manufactured mirages that seduce us through spectacle pummeling into the naive impression that we are experiencing culture in its highest form. We are an animal of two worlds, becoming more and more assimilated into the existential character of one of those worlds, until now the great organism stands 15,000 years beyond the revolutions of the Upper Paleolithic, occupying itself with transhuman daydreams using the same deracinated styles of attention which it is called upon to mechanize society, to slowly rationalize itself out of reality. So what are we to do? Is there a way out of the modern matrix and into a more authentic and dynamic experience of life? Well, there obviously is, because the very area that produced the problem is the same area that offers the solution. First of all, it's important that we shouldn't use this analysis as an excuse to demonize the left hemisphere and reify the right. Our dilemma has arisen from such a reification and a simultaneous deprivileging of a certain kind of worldview, and we should be careful not to make the same mistake again. The second thing I could say is, we really have to truly appreciate the power of language and the styles of attention to which we bear on the world. And we can do that easily by dropping the mechanistic metaphors and start talking about ourselves as embodied, vitalistic organisms again. This simple yet effective approach communicates back to the brain about what we really are, and not what one part of us against the other misguides us into believing what we are. Finally, we can all start to see attention as a skill that needs to be harnessed and practiced, starting on the things that we're really interested in. Try reading Ian McGilchrist's book The Master and His Emissary for more information on this, or if you don't like reading, also check out the video links that I provided in the description bar below, and you can hear about him talk about some of these ideas himself. Mind and society are in a constant conversation whose stories cross-pollinate and articulate the life of the other. The styles of attention that we bring to that conversation informs the kind of societies that we create, and which in turn feeds back into us and defines the way that we interpret ourselves. Human society should not be considered solely in abstract terms, but rather more intimately, because what society becomes inevitably ends up in what we become, and it's down to the psychologizing effects of certain biases that means that we rarely glimpse the wider aspects of that reality. It is our matrix, our Maya, that prevents us from accessing the real reasons why we feel in such a way, and why, like Mr. Anderson, these intuitions keep returning to haunt us with their promising vagaries. I will surrender to the notion that we might not be able to stop the onslaught of this mechanistic program before it eventually exhausts itself. It is too massive and too tightly integrated to redirect its course from within, and any attempt to do so, as seen by the devastating events of the 20th century, may bring calamity to the entire system. However, we still have a lot of power in the only place that truly matters, inside ourselves, where we can harness it to affect our relationship to this life, and precisely like the hero figures in fictional narratives, We have the choice of enmeshing ourselves with the world as it is, or severing the ties of existential bondage, and begin along the path of reclaiming our organic birthright from the machine.